So, the doubleheader review that we had in the last video has given us only one final game left to cover, that being Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1. Now, this is a game that I would say takes the biggest or most ambitious leap of the entire series by being an open world game, which I absolutely adore. I'm a huge sucker for open world stuff, and I personally feel that this gameplay style suits Sherlock like a glove. I appreciated that it was like, of course, yeah, we have your main story quest line that you can follow, but there's also tons of secondary stuff for you to do, and they handle minor or lesser cases, like your traditional side quests and stuff, to keep you going as you are gallivanting around the city, coming across new characters and helping them solve whatever issues that arise. As far as the map is concerned, it's certainly not the biggest one that I've seen in an open world game. Excuse me. It's definitely not going to be as overwhelming as some other maps can be, but I would still say it's sizable considering the type of game that this is, especially when you consider that it invites you to it encourages exploration by walking around. You have to walk everywhere you go as you unlock shops and fast travel points and everything like that. All in all, I really thoroughly enjoy this style of gameplay, completely different from the rest of the series up to this point, and I really, really hope that with the flow and everything, just the feel of this game, that this is going to be, whatever happens to Sherlock in the future, that this is the template that they use going forward for future games. And then we get to the story. Now, honestly, I walked away from this one feeling quite emotionally conflicted, quite confused in a lot of aspects. This is a very depressing story that is very emotionally focused, that sees a young Sherlock returning to the last place that his mother was alive to not only come to terms with her passing, but also uncover the truth and sort of the mystery behind it. And, it wastes little to no time. Within the first few minutes, it threw me for a huge loop. Now, I should probably preface this by saying that I had no idea what I was signing up for when I jumped into this, knew nothing about it. All I really saw was that it was a young Sherlock, a young John, and I went, okay, it's more than likely going to be a prequel. And that's all I need to know. Sign me up, take my money, let's jump into it and see what we got. I was not, however, prepared for them to suggest to me that John is a figment of Sherlock's imagination. He's not physically there. That struck me as very weird, and I was very confused and just unsure of what we were doing. And it's just not the prequel story that I felt that I signed up for when I started this game. You know, obviously, I kind of wanted the when Sherlock met Watson story that kind of explained how they came to Baker Street, how they formed the partnership that they did, started solving mysteries. Maybe we'd get to see something like how Sherlock gets Toby, and, you know, just general fan service like that. And, you know, to the game's credit, it does have things of that nature. Examples are like the game explains to you that Sherlock's iconic pipe is actually a keepsake that belonged to his father. There's a side mission where at the end of it you're rewarded with his famous violin. The game suggests to you that his trademark catchphrase, "the game is afoot," actually was started by John, but Sherlock really, really liked it, so he just kind of stole it and started using it all the time. So there is little moments like that, but as a whole, it just started off on a very peculiar note for me as a fan going in. But then, you know, the game progresses, story gets a little deeper, and it starts suggesting that Sherlock may or may not be suffering from hereditary mental illness, which, depending on your adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, the idea of mental illness or some kind of cognitive ailment isn't new to the character. And it would certainly explain, you know, why John is appearing as this imaginary friend in his head. So that kind of was par for the course as far as I was concerned. And, you know, the longer I went along with it, the more I actually started to enjoy it. I actually got behind it a little bit. I started to enjoy the way that these characters were developing, the banter that they had, the way that they would solve cases together. And I started looking at it like with an open mind, saying, you know, maybe this isn't meant to be so much of a prequel for the characters that I've come to know. Maybe Frogwares just kind of got to the point where they couldn't really do any more with those characters. So this is much more of an origin to kind of explain why we're going in a new direction with a very different take on Sherlock. And I, you know, like I said, really came around on it. I really started to accept that whole idea. And I embraced it. And I started kind of curiously thinking to myself what the future of this was going to look like as these characters matured a little bit and got wiser and really started to develop together what that would mean to have a Sherlock, an older Sherlock, a wiser Sherlock, with this older version of Watson kind of popping up wherever he needed to be. You know, I really liked that idea. But just as I started to really get comfortable with it and to look forward to it, they snatched it away from me. We get to the end of the game, and John goes away. The duo goes their separate ways. He leaves Sherlock saying, you know, I have done everything I can do for you. You know, I've kept you protected from dealing with this trauma and realizing it since we were kids, and now that you have done it and you've hopefully found peace, you don't need me anymore, and I can go. And initially I was sitting there going, man, that kind of sucks, because this John going away means that this obviously isn't going to be going in the direction that I thought it was going. They're not going to be continuing it. But it also hit surprisingly hard. I was getting a little bit choked up by it. And then there's like a post-credit scene where they give me exactly what I wanted. From the very beginning. Exactly what I hoped for. Mycroft kind of gives a little bit of backstory, saying he left his mother's manor, enrolled in school, and he was doing things in the medical field at the university. And it shows him kind of tinkering with things and messing around with cadavers and all that kind of jazz. And then Dr. Watson strolls in. Like John Watson, the Watson that we know and we love. He's certainly younger, but he looks exactly as you would expect. His mannerisms are exactly as you'd expect. And yeah, he pops in and says, "Hey, I heard you're looking for a roommate." And Sherlock says, "Yeah, I just bought a place on Baker Street." And I was like, there it is. There is exactly the moment that I spent 30 hours trying to experience. That is what I wanted. And then it hit me. That moment. There's a moment in this particular scene that just makes the whole story so much more wholesome and fulfilling as a Sherlock Holmes fan. Because while I would say yes, the main motivation of the story of this game is to kind of deal with the tragedy of Violet Holmes's death and kind of overcoming all the trauma and everything that came along with it. I would argue that the more important thing that it does is set up and suggest to you just how special and deep and important this bond and partnership would become to Sherlock. It really it shows, from Sherlock losing this imaginary friend that has been with him his entire life, with us through the entire game, that clearly means the world to him, to then getting somebody, this perfect stranger strolling in who, it's obvious that they're trying to show that, like, this imaginary John has still found a way to keep an eye on Sherlock. He's still found a way to be a part of his life. And there's a very subtle way that Sherlock acknowledges that when he realizes that this perfect stranger's name is the same as the imaginary friend that he lost. His name's John too, and just the slight tinge of facial expression, the twinkle in his eye, there's just a very subtle way that he acknowledges it, where you just know how impactful that is, and you know exactly what this relationship means and where it's going to go to in the future and how we get there. And it's just, all in all, I loved it. I think it goes without saying that, it took me on an emotional roller coaster. It made me feel things, some good, some bad, but I felt things. I was along for the ride the whole time, and that's why, as it stands right now, I would put this as my number one favorite Sherlock Holmes game. And I just hope that they continue this flow, this momentum, this everything about this game. I hope we get more of in the future. So there it is, guys. The final review of the Sherlock Holmes series. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time. Take care.